Good day, everybody. It's fabulous to be back with you today. Our continuous conversations about everything lodging and hospitality. With a precipitous drop in demand, hotel companies have had to retool their operations. Lack of visibility and uncertainty has led to cautiousness in all different markets. Fortunately, with 2020 behind us and a vaccine distribution front and center, parts of the world are slowly starting to open their borders. As we continue to grapple with this pandemic, today's discussion will highlight what markets are showing positive trends, what is different in guest needs and preferences, and what can the industry expect moving forward. I am Abbott Butt. It's great to have you with us at Hospitality Talks, and I'm here with my co-host, Sam-Erik. Sam.
Well, thank you, Abid, and welcome everyone to the Hospitality Talks episode talking about the global recovery trends. It's a very interesting topic because, of course, none of us have a crystal ball who can predict exactly what's going to happen, but we have some experts here who will be sharing with us on the topic, and it's going to be a very interesting discussion to see what are the views from our guests this time. So if it's all right, Abid, I will bring everybody to join us here, and then you can make the introduction.
Fabulous. Please do. So, Sam, a great panel today. We're very fortunate to have with us Lindsey Ueberroth, who's the Chief Executive Officer of Preferred Hotels and Resorts. Preferred has been representing hotels now for more than 50 years and has a portfolio of 700 hotels globally with very diverse hotels, fabulous hotels around the world. We also have with us David Rochefort, who is the president of Graduate Hotels. Graduate Hotels found a niche in college and university towns throughout U.S. and presented a very different experience to the users, where only some of the select service hotels were operating. Graduate was able to set a new standard, providing a different hospitality product. It is a vertically integrated company that is real estate developers, owners, and operators with about 35 hotels in a very aggressive growth plan. And last but certainly not least, Geraldine Guichardo, who is Global Head of Research for JLL Hotel and Hospitality Group. She leads the JLL's data-driven hotel and research platform that monitors all key industry indicators. And we look forward to hearing from our panelists. Welcome to Hospitality Talks, everybody.
Thank you. Happy to be here.
Thank you. To get us started, Geraldine, if you don't mind, we'll put you on the stage first. Tell us a little bit about 2020, the impact of COVID on operations, a very brief overview so that we can set the discussions for recovery.
Yeah, of course. Thank you for having me first and foremost, both of you. I'm excited to be here today. Well, I think one thing that should go without mention is the fact that COVID-19 has impacted the lodging industry drastically, right? And in an immediate way, but we can't discount the loss of lives, right? Millions of people have died, and that's important to note. Overall, the lodging industry, as I mentioned, was drastically impacted. Overall, global international arrivals dropped by like 74%, meaning that 1 billion less people traveled in 2020 relative to 2019. This then resulted in a huge decrease in demand for lodging products across every region. In Asia Pacific and the Americas, we saw demand drop about 40%, where EMEA saw a more drastic decline of about 55%. This all then resulted in obviously a drop in RevPAR. And again, EMEA saw a much higher decline in RevPAR relative to other regions with about 60% on average. Asia Pacific and the Americas saw less of a decline in RevPAR, but still huge decreases right around the 50% mark. So again, in summary, what I can say is that the impact was huge and it was immediate.
Well, as a result of this drop in business, more than 100 million people lost their jobs in this sector globally. It has been devastating for the industry, but the good thing is there are green shoots that we're looking at. Geraldine, any thoughts on the markets that performed better? And it's all a relative term because generally speaking, it was massive drop from year-over-year point of view, but the markets that did perform slightly better, were there characteristics in those markets that helped them?
Yes, absolutely. So over the pandemic, we saw that leisure demand held up, again, relatively held up better than other types of demand. And so what that meant was that leisure-driven markets performed better than more urban, dense locations, right? And all of that was really because people that decided to travel were still fearful of contracting the virus, right? And so the thought was that, well, if we're in open spaces, if we're in private accommodations, maybe the risk is less. And so we saw that at every regional level, leisure drive-to markets, resort markets definitely outperformed. And again, we say that in a relative sense, right? At year end, the RevPAR of these types of markets declined 35 to 45%, whereas the more dense locations saw RevPAR decline upwards of 55%, even 60 to 80% in some cases. So again, those outperformers were really the leisure drive-to markets. In regards to hotel product, economy hotels really outperformed.
And do you see those trends continuing on in 2020? Do you think leisure would lead the way out of this downturn? And what about some of the other segments like business travel or meetings and conferences?
Yeah, no, you're correct in that. In 2021, I am anticipating leisure demand to be the first to recover. And that really is going to be driven by a wide distribution of vaccines, right? I think already we are seeing some of that happening now, whereas the greater amounts of the population get inoculated, they are feeling more comfortable even thinking about traveling and planning ahead, right? Where we saw that booking window of really shortened during COVID, we are seeing people kind of think ahead to the spring and summertime and wanting to get out and travel. And it's what a lot of people are coining the revenge travel, right? I then expect corporate travel and group demand to start recovering later this fall. But we'll have to think about the way that that type of demand will look. It definitely will, the makeup of corporate demand will be different in a post-COVID world. And there are a couple reasons for that. Do you want me to go into that, or
Yeah, please. A brief overview of what the reasoning behind that would be great.
Absolutely. So overall, I expect corporate demand to reduce the number of trips, but maybe extend the length of their stays. And a lot of that being driven by the rise in virtual meetings. That's case in point, we're here today. Working from home arrangements and just more flexibility about where you're able to work. And lastly, we mustn't forget that a lot of companies are under pressure to be more environmentally and sustainably conscious, which means that their corporate travel budgets will be reduced. And so collectively, all those factors really point to the fact that corporate travel will be different in a post-COVID world. And as I just mentioned, I suspect that business travelers will reduce the number of their trips, but maybe prolong their trips and maybe stay over the weekend in whatever market they're visiting and maybe invite their family and kind of evolve into that leisure demand that we've heard of before.
Oh, terrific. Talk a little bit about how will the lodging and hospitality industry fundamentally will change as a result of this pandemic? What differences will we see coming out of it?
Differences will be many, right? I mean, there's different ways to look at it. I think operationally, hotels have learned to really reconfigure their operations and operate more efficiently and just re-engineer the way that hotel business is run, right? And so I suspect that those same programming and kind of efficiencies that have been implemented during COVID will last and be implemented in a post-COVID-19 world, right? I think even before COVID happened, profit margins across all hotels were really pinched. And so already hoteliers were thinking about ways to save costs, right? And so COVID-19 just kind of expedited that process. I think there'll also be a huge focus on people, right, and the guest and the consumer, and making him or her feel more comfortable, more safe, and a huge focus on cleaning and sanitation, right, to help people feel more comfortable traveling. So cleaning and sanitation will be the most important amenity going forward. And lastly, if you think about how the leisure demand that traveled during COVID and how they were choosing where they were staying, a lot gravitating to open spaces and open air hospitality. Definitely expect more hotels to add open spaces, not only for F&B options, but also for meeting and events programming.
Well, Geraldine, you brought up about the profit margins, that how thin they were even prior to pandemic, and pandemic obviously has erased any possibility of profit, at least in the short term basis. The stakeholders obviously that are absolutely counting on the industry to bounce back, are the investors in the industry. Talk a little bit about the current inventory. I've read lots of articles and there are lots of conversations on some of the hotels never opening their doors again. Do you see any trends in different regions of the markets, and what does that look like? And I'll turn it over to Sam here in a bit, but if you wouldn't mind telling us the current inventory changes that you are anticipating.
Yeah, no, of course. I think we all know that there have been many hotels that have been forced to close because of the harsh operating environments, right? They just haven't been able to hold on. And so we are seeing a lot of these hotels closing, and that will remain permanently closed. Several of these hotels, in particular, it depends on the market, right? If you're in a very dense market or near university, you have a lot of these hotels being converted to student housing. Several markets are also, and local governments are using a lot of these hotels that are closed for homeless housing, which is a huge problem all around the world. And so there are, I guess, some positives of some of these hotels closing. And another way to think about it is as well that, leading up to 2020, supply was increasing almost above long-term average of 2%. And so the closure of these hotels will actually help the recovery because there will be less hotels available for consumers to choose from, right? And so it's almost a survival of the fittest type of mentality, right? Where the hotels that will manage to stay open will be able to really see that upside when demand returns more aggressively.
Well, the pre-pandemic days, certainly in some markets, the supply was outpacing the demand. So I think that would balance out a little bit, but certainly the hotels that were functionally obsolete, they might not open their doors, and they might be converted to another adaptive reuse type of use, so that the real estate is continuously being used. Let me hand it over to Sam-Erik right now, Geraldine, and I'll be with you in a moment. Sam.
Thank you. Geraldine, I'm interested in some certain destinations who has taken actually advantage of the situation where the guest is looking for a lot of space and privacy. Are there certain areas in this world, I'm just thinking about Maldives type of places where they actually have benefited, where people are really looking for that very exclusive experience and also the privacy. Any other areas of the world that you see that is happening?
Yeah, absolutely. So really any mountainous areas or coastal areas that just have more space physically, right, than like a New York, right, or even a London proper, are really benefiting from this shift in consumers, right, wanting that open air, that open space. And so, yeah, like you mentioned, even the Cancuns of the world, right? And here in the US, again, like a Tampa or a Myrtle Beach, just easy to get to locations by car or by train, again, are really outperforming. And we're seeing those positive trends already manifesting themselves in these types of markets.
Yeah, I have also read somewhere about Sri Lanka, where they have some sort of they call it, they have a type of tourism where they restrict the traveler to meet the locals, but they have very controlled travel itineraries, and they have medical doctors in each hotels. Is anything else in the other part of the world that you may have seen that has taken this approach to attracting tourists again, even though while we are in the early stages of vaccination?
Yeah, some islands in the Caribbean actually are working with their local destination marketing organizations to kind of broadly share that, anyone that is willing to work remotely for a month or more can stay in one of the accommodations on the island. And a lot of folks have taken them up on this offer. And so I've noticed that the locations that have been a little bit less restrictive in who they are allowing in have also been able to outperform. As you mentioned, the Maldives has been one of the the markets in Asia Pacific that has been able to outperform. One, obviously, because it's just a beautiful location, but they have been less restrictive than, for example, Japan or other countries or markets in the region. Anyone with a negative COVID test is able to travel to the Maldives.
My last question before I hand over to Abid is about the trends in changes in brand affiliations. Has there been an impact on certain owners are giving up on one particular brand and they're going for some other options now while they're trying to get out of the situation they are in?
Well, from what I've studied and kind of read, I know that the major hotel parent brand companies have been working very closely with hotel owners and flexible, right? More so than ever before, because, this is not just an economic crisis. This is also a health crisis, and one that no one expected. So it's not like the global financial crisis where, to a certain extent, you could point fingers as to who was guilty of causing all of the turmoil that happened. And so there has been a working relationship between brands and owners. And in fact, the number of franchise hotel rooms globally relative to all hotels rooms globally increased a bit in 2020, despite there being an ongoing pandemic. So I think the value of being part of a huge platform and having those marketing dollars, the training resources, the distribution is more important today than ever before. And so we've seen continual growth on that end.
Okay, thank you very much, Geraldine. Very nice. Thank you very much for all this input. And then over to you, Abid.
Thank you. Geraldine, talk a little bit about the transaction side of things. Typically in a downturn, transactions seem to pick up because people can't service their debt or for whatever reason they want out and the assets trade. What does that look like? Is there still liquidity from that standpoint? Can you speak to that a little bit?
Yes, of course. So overall in 2020, we saw global hotel investment volume decrease to $27.4 billion, which represented about a 60% decline in activity, which was huge, right? And the reason behind that was that the governments and lenders were both very accommodating during 2020, as you can imagine, because of the harsh operating environment. And so what this then allowed owners was to focus on managing their properties, right? And again, engineering operations to be able to make it through. But this focus on asset management then, deterred owners from putting their properties up for sale. And so that really led to such a huge decline, right, in performance, and investors also being very cautious as to what movements they made during the onset of the pandemic. But as demand starts picking up and a recovery in fundamentals truly begins, we will see more activity pick up. And a lot of the players that are providing the liquidity in the market right now are those private equity and institutional investors. In 2020 alone, private equity funds globally raised over $24 billion to invest in the hospitality space. So there is a lot of capital out there. I think what needs to improve is just the quality of the product that is made for sale, because then that will kind of result in more activity.
Well, one last question before we bring our next guest. New supply. Do you still see that churning in the background? Typically, hotel supply has always been very lumpy, but do you see that there is still activity on the new hotels coming online?
So we are seeing hotels still come online. There was a decline, though, in hotel construction pipelines almost across every part of the world. And obviously with just the harsh operating environment and things being so uncertain, those construction pipelines were definitely affected. However, there's still new hotels coming online, and I think they're being very strategic about the way the amenities and the hotel spaces are being reconfigured again to make sure that they're meeting the new guest expectations and preferences.
Well, thank you for that. Please stay with us. We'll have you back in a moment. But at this particular point, I would like to bring up Lindsey Ueberroth with Preferred Hotels. Lindsey, thanks for taking the time and being with us.
Great to be here with you.
Well, if you wouldn't mind a very brief overview of what 2020 was like for you and for Preferred. You obviously have approximately 50% of the portfolio in urban locations and 50% is in leisure resort destinations. Tell us a bit about operating hotels. Did any hotels have to cease their operations? What types of hotels did better? Just a brief overview, please.
Sure. So yeah, 2020 was a bit of a roller coaster. Kind of a macro level. Starting in March, of our 700 hotels, about 60% of them were closed. So that was either due to government restrictions, but in many cases it was just due to the the low occupancy numbers, single digit occupancy. From a reservations transactions perspective, we were about 98% off of reservations coming through our channels over 2019. So it was pretty dramatic, that kind of the peak of the crisis. The good news is now, as things have started to recover, and it was a bit of a rolling recovery. I mean, obviously, China was the first to recover, then it hit Europe. They had a rolling recovery, US. So it's trended that way. Now 80% of our hotels have reopened. Reservations are still significantly off, about 70% over 2019, but we're seeing that inch back up every single month. And it still is a rolling recovery. Obviously, with each day, each week, you hear about restrictions either being lifted or extended depending on where you are in the world. So with the global portfolio, that's good and bad in many ways. Very similar to what Geraldine was saying in her comments. Our resort destinations have actually fared very well for the most part. This shift in instead of international travel, regional travel drove a lot of demand to resort properties with a lot of space, a lot of amenities. And in some cases, they beat budget. They were able to drive rate even at lower occupancies because it was higher rate, longer stays. So that's been kind of the bright spot as we look at this. City centers are still the most impacted. The major markets, the San Francisco's, New York, London's, Rome's. I mean, you can kind of look at that around the globe. That's sort of the high level of how it's worked. And I think our role in working with our partner hotels was to help them navigate by pivoting to capture that regional either drive market or looking at new markets that now when people were exploring their own backyards and willing to work, stay, and play or study in some cases from hotels wanting to get a break from their own homes.
Well, thank you for that. Lindsey, you talked about hotels pivoting to possibly gain some different markets that they might not have considered in the past. Any particular campaigns, any particular programs that might have worked better than the others in capturing that business? And again, we're talking about relative terms because 2020, as you mentioned and Geraldine mentioned, was way off.
Yeah, so one of our most successful campaigns was called Loving Local. So it was absolutely 100% targeted towards that drive market or very short regional flights, where people were comfortable doing that if they were able to. That was incredibly successful. I think, in a lot of ways, and I actually think this is going to be a trend that will continue. All of us had our routines. Some people love to go to Europe for the summer, or there were certain destinations that they traveled, especially on the leisure side. And now they're getting to explore their own countries or their own regions a little bit differently. And through our loyalty program and putting in some incredible value adds for the guests that were willing to travel, that was really impactful. I think the other thing we're starting to see is as hotels have now kind of accepted the reality of the recovery and that a lot of international travel is still going to be delayed. They're looking at markets. I'll use California as an example. We've got a property in Santa Monica. It used to get 50% of their business from the European market in the summer, long stays. They're now pivoting and realizing that they're probably now going to go target the Eastern Seaboard. Now you've got New York, Florida, kind of that East Coast traveler that may not have come to the West Coast, but now that's the new, California Riviera to them. So it's really just helping hotels rethink the markets and the traveler that's going to come to their destination now and telling that story a little bit differently.
So from macro perspective, are you seeing Asia recovering faster? Is Europe starting to show some trends that we can count on? Because everybody is looking for these positive stories. Are there any, from your perspective, any region that is showing better trends?
Again, it's rolling. So yeah, Asia, yes. I mean, if you look at China from our perspective, has recovered, but it's still all intra-China travel. So that's what we're starting to see. You've got these bubbles that they talk about, where you've got markets within regions within Asia where you're seeing that travel start to take place again. In between, Thailand, Singapore, Hong Kong. You're seeing that. Europe is just really starting to reopen. Obviously, the UK has talked about their reopening plans. There's certain markets that have continued to do well. I mean, I know Greece is a great example of one. They think all the islands are going to be vaccinated very soon. I think you're going to see pockets of great growth and recovery within Europe. The U.S. is actually is rebounding nicely, but again, in mostly the resort destinations. So they each have their pockets, and there's certain countries that are recovering and doing it better than others.
It's funny you bring this up. I was reading an article, I believe it was New York Times, that had highlighted the quarantine requirements across borders, and every jurisdiction has different requirements, and people don't know what to expect or how to plan their visit. So I think international travel probably has struggled as a result of that, but it will continue to come back. Lindsey, Preferred has been in this business for more than 50 years of representing a collection of independent hotels. As of late, in the last maybe a decade or so, a lot of the legacy brands, if I may use that terminology, they launched their own version of soft brands. Have you seen any changes? Obviously, for a while there, you had very few competitors in this space, and now just about everybody has jumped into space. What has that done for your stakeholders and your member hotels? And talk us through a little bit of that as to how the soft brands have evolved.
You're absolutely right. 10 years ago, our competitive set was very different. I like to look at everything as a great opportunity, and in many ways, the fact that all of the major chains have gotten into this space has actually helped elevate the awareness of the independent hotel market. I like to say it's the sincerest form of flattery. That obviously there was this shift in travelers' desires for this very unique, one of a kind, very authentic stay, that in a lot of ways, the chains, what they used to provide was consistency, clarity. It was everywhere you went, you knew that hotel brand was going to look the same, feel the same. There was a comfort level in that. Now, as travel has changed so dramatically, and people's comfort level with where they go has changed, they want a different experience. So it's actually helped buoy the awareness of the independent hotel market. We have seen a lot of hotel owners that were previously with hard chains deflag and go completely independent and partner with organizations like ourselves. So overall, it's been a very positive thing. I'd say in the last 5 years, we've probably had 50 hotels that have deflagged from every major chain to go independent, and seeing a lot of success. Obviously, the model's very different. Our model versus even the independent brands that the chains have. Ours is just a very different model in terms of contract terms, flexibility of a lot of things that generally a chain would mandate, but we give them that kind of global infrastructure, seal of approval, a global platform that allows them to remain independent and be very, very successful while doing it.
Well, that's terrific. You are correct that the traveler's preference a lot of times, particularly in international markets, is to experience the uniqueness in what the independent hotels have presented. One more question before I turn it over to Sam. 2020, did you see more hotels joining your network? Typically, when transactions occur, there's a lot of activity from one flag to the other, or deflags, or representation overall. Was 2020 more hotels were reaching out to you? Did you lose some hotels, or was it about the same?
So we added about 30 new hotels during 2020, which was great. We did lose a few hotels, and a lot of those, sadly, were just due to the fact that they had to close their doors. And we hope that we get to welcome them back. As Geraldine was talking about, there's sort of the operational demands have put an incredible strain on certain hotels, depending on their lending situation and the destination that they're located in. But I would say, in light of a pandemic, adding 30 new hotels was great. We sort of netted out in terms of hotels we lost and hotels that we added. But I will say, generally in a downturn, our brand does very well because hotels need more support than ever. So, I'll call it the partnership becomes even stronger. So it ended up being a very strong year for us, and we're feeling very, very optimistic and bullish as we head into 2021.
Oh, that's fabulous. That's a great news. Let me turn it over to Sam, and I'll be with you in a second. Sam.
Yeah, thank you, Lindsey. I've been a great admirer of preferred hotels for many years, and well, I hope to see more preferred hotels in the Northern Europe and the Nordics one of these days. Sadly, Finland is not on. We don't have yet, as far as I know, but I'll work on it for you.
Great.
But actually, my question is more related to the quality standards. You must have some inspection of quality, that you're inspecting the hotels, that they are meeting the preferred standards, preferred hotel standards. Now, during this particular time, there are, of course, some hotels are tightening the belt, and they may cut some of the standards that they were known for, and of course may have an impact on that they are part of the preferred hotels. Do you see any of that you may have to have a sort of further discussions about that those standards that were in place originally, but they have maybe been changed because of the COVID?
Great question. You're right. I mean, our quality assurance program is a cornerstone of the brand, and it's kind of twofold. You used to have the on-property private shopper experience. Somebody would come through, spend 2 days inspecting the hotel in conjunction with the reputation management tools that we were using on a daily basis. Obviously, during COVID, you can't do the on-property inspections. But what I would say is the one thing that's going to evolve is actually, I think, new criteria around health and safety. And our hotels really stepped up their game. I think what was interesting, and this might be something that stays as before, the magic of staying at a luxury hotel was a lot of things happened behind the scenes. You weren't really showing guests how you were going about cleaning rooms and public spaces and of that nature. Now that's kind of become upfront. You wanted to show your guest exactly what you're doing. You're posting it on your website. You're very transparent about the protocols you put in place. So that was the one thing that we required of all hotels. I mean, if you go to their brand property pages, it's showing what they're doing to maintain health and safety and protocols, because that was the number one priority of every hotel was the safety of their guests and of their own team members.
Yeah. Another angle I want to ask you about is you have traditions and preferred hotels and resorts global events where you are where they're meeting key decision makers face to face. Obviously, this has not been possible during the pandemic. What are the plans now looking ahead about creating these global events so the membership of preferred hotels can benefit from the services that you provide?
Sure. So we actually did run 3 in-person regional meetings in 2020, which were great. We were only able to do those here in the U.S. And we thought it was important to show that you can run meetings safely. We put in some really important procedures and processes that I think hotels are implementing now as they welcome small groups back. We have been in a very creative virtual event environment. We're targeting the summer timeframe to start to transition into doing some in-person events. But I think the reality is for all of us is as we move forward, I think there's this hybrid event concept is going to remain. We do have our global conference scheduled to take place in Boston in November. We're hoping that we get a strong attendance, but there will be a big virtual component to it. And I think the good news about that is you can actually expand your reach, and you can have more attendees participate as a result of what's now become mainstream. So I ultimately see it as a good thing, but we are seeing in-person events come back.
Yeah, as far as I also understand that it's here to stay, that you have a combination of there maybe less people actually are coming physically, but they also want to join distantly and so on. So that's we noticed that from some of our other discussions with different meeting organizers and so on. But Lindsey, thank you very much, and I'll hand you over now back to Abid for the final questions.
Great.
Thank you. Lindsey, a couple of more questions before we bring in our next guest. Distribution has evolved in the last decade. Lots of different players in this space, lots of different ways that consumers are booking their reservations. How has that evolved for Preferred? And what changes do you see moving forward? New disruptors, new technologies that might be coming down the pike?
You're right. Distribution it's ever changing, and obviously our goal at Preferred is to bring all of the latest and greatest distribution partners to our member hotels, stay ahead of that. Obviously you hear about the Googles of the world, and and it seems in every country, especially coming out of Asia, there's always new channels that we're trying to stay ahead of. And again, China is the greatest example to me, just how they book travel through different mobile platforms. And I think that is going to continue to be something that we need to stay ahead of. I'm a big believer. I think that the travel trade community is here to stay. Everybody keeps saying it's going to die off. I disagree. I think as travel gets more complicated, and you look at what's happened now, but they're changing the way that they do business. They've got their own online platforms, mobile platforms. Even destination management companies and tour operators are changing the way in which they can bring distribution to bear. So I wish if I had somebody else from my team here, they could probably answer it more eloquently. I will just say that every day and every week there seems to be a new player, and we're just trying to keep ahead of it.
Fair enough. In moving forward, growth potential for your network, do you see one region coming up strongly? You obviously have a global footprint today, but do you see growth in possibly stronger in one region over the other?
Well, outside of Finland, being our number one priority, we do have target markets, and really there is global markets. We're seeing a lot of growth actually in parts of Africa, a lot of momentum there. Southeast Asia still has a lot of growth for us, and then pockets of Europe. The U.S. is a very mature market for us, so that's one that we see growth just not as steeply. Latin America is another one we look at, but just due to some of the economic challenges that a lot of the major markets, that's been a little bit slower for us. So I'd say the key ones are pockets of Europe, Southeast Asia, and definitely parts of Africa are really starting to pick up some momentum for us.
Terrific. Please stay with us. At this point, I'm going to bring in David Rochefort for our next guest, but we'll have you back in a moment. David, thanks for taking the time to join us.
Absolutely. Happy to be here. It's a pleasure.
So, David, if you wouldn't mind sort of recapping 2020 for us briefly. Obviously, hotel industry was badly impacted, but your hotels are typically tied to college and school towns. Well, most of the colleges were working remotely. So tell us what 2020 was like for you.
It was a roller coaster, and a roller coaster that, we're not exactly excited to be on. I was thinking as I was off screen at this time last year, as there started to be some indications that there were going to be issues, particularly coming out of Asia on the West Coast, some of the urban markets. We were having conversations with lenders and investors, and it'll sound now very naive at the time, but we were saying to ourselves and our partners, well, we see this as a urban city center issue, international travel issue. We're immune to this because universities never close, and that's who we've aligned ourselves with. Well, what we didn't really realize is we probably ran into the one catastrophe, that does actually impact our core customer in these universities, which is a global pandemic. And so we went through many phases of this. We went through what I've effectively called the triage phase, where it seemed like every day something was changing and we were reacting to that. We were on the phone with our lenders and our partners, literally amending what we told them the day before, because in those 24 hours, the world had changed. And so, we went through a phase in Q1, at the end of Q1 last year, and in Q2, where we closed every hotel. We were operating at that point 22 graduates, probably 25 or 26 hotels with what was in our pipeline and yet to convert. We closed every one in the US and in the UK. We had to lay off upwards of 1,200 employees. And you heard those stories of general managers that were literally sleeping in our hotels because they were the only employee holding the forts down, ensuring that everything was working. We as a company were in a great position, as good of a position, I guess you would say, to weather the storm. We had tremendous investors and have tremendous investors. And so once we kind of got through the triage phase, we shut everything down. If I never for the rest of my career have to talk about cash burn, I think will be a very good moment, because that seemed to be all that we were talking about for days and weeks and months at a time. So once we really made it through the triage phase, we started to turn to the rest of 2020, which was number one, we have grown, as was mentioned in the early parts of this, tremendously quickly over the last 6 years as a brand to 28 hotels today. In a crazy way, the pandemic allowed us to hit pause and say, what were the things that we would have done differently 6 years ago if we were to anticipated the size and scale of the brands and the collection today? And so we looked at every piece of the organization and how can we do things more efficiently, and just naturally through growth, there'd be roles that we'd say, well, there's 2 people doing this today, that could be consolidated into 1 and be much more efficient, or there's silos within teams and groups, and how do we bring this together? And that was a huge component to this that I believe will actually be unbelievably beneficial as we come out of this and help us grow faster. And then as it relates to the hotels themselves, we did reopen in a rolling fashion based on demand, every hotel except for 1 through the summer. We actually opened 4 new graduates in the midst of the pandemic in different markets. We partnered with the Cleveland Clinic and Procter & Gamble to introduce Graduate Cares, which is our cleanliness program. Unbelievably proud of that. A 20 plus hotel collection to have, such best in class partners from a cleanliness perspective alongside us. And we actually saw our share of RevPAR grow through the pandemic. Part of that is that we are a very leisure friendly brand. Part of that is these markets that we're in. And one of the last ones that Geraldine actually highlighted, I feel like she was giving me the layup on this, but we ended up in the back half of last year housing something like 1,500 students in our hotels for the fall semester. And that was either in a direct partnership with universities that did not have enough socially distant space to be able to provide their students as they came back, or that was just simply parents that were saying, we're not very comfortable with the off-campus housing situation, 9 kids packed into 3 rooms or whatever scenario you're talking about. And they were very comfortable with our cleanliness standards, with the fact that, they could buy up and actually have rooms clean for their children, that there was security overnight. And it became a huge shift for us, and really a win-win, not just financially for the short term, but we saw this as, really strengthening our relationship with the universities, our core customers, but also creating lifetime guests and real loyalty with these students who are telling their parents that we know we can capture as they come back. So it's been a roller coaster. I was accused yesterday of someone laughing at me and saying, what I'm reading between the lines is you saying the pandemic was the best thing that could have ever happened to your company. And I said, I hope in 12 or 24 months, I'm truly saying that. It doesn't quite feel like that, but we know we've positioned ourselves to be a stronger and a better company going forward as a result of a lot of what we've done over the last 12 months.
Well, hopefully the industry will have learned enough things from this pandemic that we won't have to go through that ever again. But that's a wishful thinking on my part. I think, as the pundits have said, coming out of this pandemic, the margins, EBITDA margins, would be at least 50 to 100 bips better than what they were in 2019. So a lot of the efficiencies would have been put into place as a result of that. David, talk a little bit about importance of food and beverage component in graduate hotels. Now, you are, if I may use that, you're targeting younger audience attached to the universities, and with pandemic, the college sports are down. Universities are teaching students remotely. How has that impacted, particularly from F&B offerings?
Yeah, I'd say food and beverage was, first of all, it's a cornerstone and key to who we are and what we do. Each one of our locations has some sort of dynamic food and beverage offering, typically more than just one. It's a coffee shop and a rooftop bar. And so that remains the most depressed component of our business, even more so than rooms revenue, just by the nature of some of these models don't work in a socially distanced world, simply from a bottom line perspective. And we've been very stringent on when and why we open our outlets, based a lot on local municipalities, weather, our outdoor space that we have available. We have a rooftop bar here at our hotel in Nashville that we did actually open in the midst of this because of the amount of outdoor space and seats that we could seat, and do that very safely, and has been tremendous, not just locally, but for positioning that hotel. So, long story short, one of the big things we've done, I'd say going into the pandemic, if every one of our graduates had, multiple food and beverage outlets, so let's call it 2, that meant we had probably over 40 food and beverage outlets across the portfolio. Well, each one was really operating almost individually. And some of that is on purpose, right? Each graduate is meant to really be hyper local and tell the stories of those local communities. However, what we're spinning out of and coming out of the pandemic is, some of it is the smoke and mirrors of the local brands. So, to someone in a coffee shop, in a Poindexter, which is kind of our coffee shop brand that we've launched, it's going to feel local. However, everything has now been centralized. Purchasing has been centralized. The menu has been totally standardized. How we're measuring ourselves, and much of that is how we're going to come out of this with a greater margin than going into this from a food and beverage perspective. So, long story short, we've taken much of the same approach that we did to the rest of the organization to food and beverage around, a stronger standardization and centralization of what it is on the back end or behind the scenes, while still maintaining, graduates and our brand's commitment to hyper local spaces and concepts. And we believe that's kind of the winning mix, for lack of a better term, as we come out of this with our customers.
Terrific. One more question before I turn it over to Sam. You talked about opening 4 hotels in the midst of pandemic, where most of the hotels were closing their doors or delaying the openings. Tell us a bit about what those conversations were like. What went into that decision to start these hotels operations as opposed to delaying the opening?
Part of it is by being owner, operator, brand, developer, designer, we have complete control over those types of decisions. I feel for my peers that were battling with Marriott on standards and what to do and whether they should close. We're also, predominantly non-union. I really felt as we were having these conversations, we just to share a little anecdote, we made the decision to shut down our entire portfolio and executed on it in, I believe it was 5 days. And I'm convinced that the following, if it took 2 to 4 weeks, is kind of what I was told by some of my other partners and peers in the industry, that was probably multiple millions of dollars that we were able to save back in March of last year when we were able to do that. That was purely because as soon as we said, this is the right decision as a company for the short term, we were able to execute on that. Similarly, as we came out of this, we were able to really make conscious decisions and ramp back out of this. So as kind of owner operator brands, we were able to control those decisions. And as a result, we also knew that we weren't taking a short-term 3, 6, 9, even 12-month view on the world. We were saying, where are we continuing to be as a brand 2 years from now, 3 years from now? And it's important that we complete these projects, deliver them. Granted, in some cases, we opened in Storrs, Connecticut, for example, where the University of Connecticut is located, and very quickly leased every room of the hotel to the university, who needed every room available to maintain operations. So we were opening and pivoting as we were going. We were opening in Cincinnati with a big contract from the university. So there was things dictating what the world looked like. But there was never a decision to hold off on any of our projects. It was always, we just had a very lucky position and the liquidity that necessary to take a very long-term view of, well, we believe the world will get back to normal. It's just a matter of when. And we want to make sure that we're there locally, and we're ramping, even if it's a different type of ramp. But we're going to be in the markets and we're going to ramp. And truthfully, the biggest thing for Graduate has been awareness around our brand. And the more dots on a map that we can have, the better off we are from an awareness perspective. And so it was an important long-term decision to not just open those, but also continue to open our hotels this year as well.
Fabulous. Well, thank you for that. Let me hand it over to Sam, and I'll be back with you in a moment.
Thank you.
Thank you. David, I'm interested. It makes totally sense to me that you have this concept of graduate hotels in the US and large university cities. What are your, looking ahead, what are your sort of focus areas now in US? And also, could you share how about international opportunities for you?
Yeah, so we are unbelievably excited. We're going to open our first 2 international markets in what I would argue the 2 most iconic university towns in the world, in Cambridge and Oxford in the UK. And we're going to do that in June, which, when you have an entirely domestic team trying to open hotels and can't travel, it's been quite we're doing model rooms via FaceTime, and it's been just a kind of crazy world to live in to be able to do that. So we're unbelievably excited. We are, we picked arguably the 2 easiest markets for our model to work in internationally, just because those 2 mimic the US kind of the most. But long term, we do see a future for Graduate in Europe, in particularly. There are some successful brands that have done what we're kind of our model over there. Most of them typically kind of lean towards the hostel. We're more full service. But I've always said I have this kind of international dream of putting Graduates in all of the major travel abroad markets, so that you start to have real visibility back and forth. So, say it's Barcelona, and you've got a tremendous number of US students that travel to Barcelona for their international study abroad. They know Graduate, they know their reputation, they kind of know what we stand for and how we program ourselves. And so that's kind of a long-term dream. I don't think it'll happen in the next 24 months, but it's certainly on the radar. And then domestically, we have 28 Graduates. Domestically, we'll have 33 by the end of next year. We continue to look at a lot of markets, and one of the big, where we see a tremendous amount of growth coming is we've actually had a lot of universities start to approach us that have said that they understand the amenity that we're bringing to their markets. And they've started to say, well, we want a graduate in our town. How do we get you here? Here's a piece of dirt. Here's a building. Here's a location, heart of campus, A++ location. And all of a sudden, the markets that can support an independent boutique product like us has expanded 2 to 3 times where we were before, just simply by the fact that you have a university saying, here's the best real estate in the town. Let's partner on this. Let's figure this out.
How much of that is going to be rebranding or taking over an existing building or upgrading a hostel and make it a graduate hotel? Or how much of that's going to be new greenfield developments?
You know, I think the public-private partnerships directly are the vast majority of those are going to be ground ups. And as a developer graduate, we've done it all. We've converted a red roof inn in Charlottesville, Virginia. It's one of my favorite conversions of branded product. We've converted a full-service Hilton in Eugene, Oregon, 30,000 square feet of meeting space, 275 rooms. And then we've taken what was the Hotel Duncan in New Haven, Connecticut. It was a 110-year-old building. We brought it back to life and was totally unique. And then we've got our ground up here in Nashville. Is completely customized to this town. We're going to open in June in New York City on Roosevelt Island. It's a complete ground up project in partnership with Cornell University and their tech campus. It's the craziest hotel I think I'll ever be a part of. You're on an island literally in the East River, but as a result of that, you've got 65% of your rooms with unobstructed views of the New York City skyline. Totally special and unique. So as developer, like we have all those capabilities, and what that means is as a brand, we're relentless in terms of location. It's down to sometimes corners in some of these markets, and we say we will wait out this mom and pop owner of a particular corner because that's where we need to be if we want to be in this market. It's given us the flexibility to not have to stretch on what a graduate looks like or how it feels as a result of that.
Unfortunately, I've never had a chance to visit one of your hotels, but just judging from what I read on the website, is you're looking really through a local lens when you're creating your hotels, and I think it's a terrific concept. I have to say, I have to kind of congratulate you on that. It's probably one of the most exciting things I have seen for a very long time. What you're doing with the graduate hotel. So, well, thank you for all this that you answered, and let me hand over now to Abid.
Well, thank you, David. You talked about vertically integrated. You are, for lack of any better words, an owner operator. Talk a little bit about the challenges in acquisition front, capital stack. Geraldine talked about that the transaction volume was way down in 2020, and it still continues to be a bit depressed. So tell us, what are the challenges you're facing in the acquisition front?
Yeah, so I'll divide it a little bit. So for the most part, although we have some projects in our pipeline, we have a pipeline that's relatively full. Although opening 4 hotels in a year is it's a down year for us, and I know there's a lot of people that would say you're crazy. That would be the biggest opening of for a lot of brands, especially wholly owned like we are. So we remain active on the acquisition front. Conversations, we're just not seeing much ready to transact, whether that is the support from the government for some of these smaller owners, whether it's just the lenders, which we're on the other side of this, and I can touch on the lenders kind of holding steady. We haven't really seen this flight of fleeing a lot of these assets. So in pure acquisitions, although we kind of know our targets and we continue to be in conversations and we're close on loosening up on some of these, it's relatively slow for the time being. As a result, on the other side, our lending partners have been tremendous. We're, again, because we are a platform, because we have kind of the structure that we have, if we were just a hotel of one or even a hotel of a few, we'd be in a very different scenario than we are today. Because of the lending relationships we have, how we've treated them, because of the investors we have, we're in a totally different place. In fact, as I mentioned, it allowed us to really say, how do we, instead of once we got through survival, and I've been preaching this, it was always about short-term survival, but long-term growth. We've been in a position because of our lenders and investors that we have been able to turn to the future. We knew the short term was on solid footing and solid ground. And I think we're unbelievably lucky as a result of that. And we do know there are a lot of owners out there that are not in the same position, that don't have the capital sources or the liquidity that they can pull on to ensure that they're on solid footing for the next 12 months. And again, I think we've taken the view on our markets in the future that we know the world is going to come back. We know our markets are going to come back. It's about when. And I think, unfortunately, there's a lot of other owners that they're saying, we can survive 6 months, but if we don't get back to some degree of normalcy, we don't know what the world's going to look like on the back half of the year. We're looking 12, 24, 36 months down the line.
Terrific. Sam, I'm going to continue my conversation with David, but we'll bring everybody back in the loop. They're already on the screen. But David, one more question. You talked a little bit about the execution challenges, particularly as you're going offshore in Cambridge and Oxford markets. The best of plans sometimes need people, boots on the ground. Now, with the travel restrictions and all the things that you talked about, how are you progressing with those hotel openings, and what hurdles has that presented?
Yeah, there's definitely hurdles. I will actually say one of the things the pandemic forced us to do, we talked a little bit about meetings. Today is the last day of our 2021 GM conference, which we have done. We split it into 4 different locations instead of having 60 people in one place. We've done a semi-hybrid regional structure. And so we were having these very conversations where the pandemic has forced us to evolve as a company. And my speech yesterday is that we're growing up as a brand. We're becoming much more sophisticated, kind of refining our edges. And as a result of that, to answer your question, when we were opening a Graduate, it was all about the boots on the ground in the past. We put people through a relatively rigorous multi-day training to try to say, this is how you speak Graduate, this is how you do this. And that was great, but we also know attrition in our industry was really hard. So how do you get back out to these places to try to do that? We've moved, actually early last year, we had just launched our learning management system to be able to train and track what our employees go through. And that was all of a sudden put into fast track. And we moved everything online. We moved all of our trainings online. It became a lot about internal content creation. And so I would say, we're actually in a better position today as a result of this to open hotels internationally, be able to put people through a pretty rigorous online training now while still having a lesser degree of kind of the boots on the ground requirements. It's going to be a challenge because we are a very high touch brand. It is about the little details. We always talk about the difference between us and some of our competitors is the last 5% of a design. It's the background for Sam and all the little touches and everything that makes you stand out. It's the right coffee table books on a table that people open. It's the artwork that you have on the wall. A lot of that is done locally and sourced locally to really have that connection. And so the teams become unbelievably flexible and creative in terms of what that is and the partners we're working with. And it's going to be exciting to see the outcome.
Oh, terrific. Lindsey, if I may ask you a question, your frequent guest program, tell us a bit about the profile of your member guests, and have you seen any changes in their preferences, in their desires and demands?
Yeah, so it was the pandemic was interesting from a loyalty perspective. I think traditionally you think of loyalty programs as that road warrior who's racking up their points and can't wait to go on their vacation. The demographic of the I Prefer loyalty member was a lot more of a leisure traveler. So actually it did very well during the pandemic because now all of a sudden you had a leisure guest who now really wanted to go stay, and they were looking for that regional experience. And in terms of just trends and what we're seeing, it's definitely a focus on health and wellness. As we said, resorts with a lot of activities and amenities. I think that Geraldine mentioned this too. This focus on sustainable travel and tourism is huge. We actually launched a new brand called Beyond Green during this to really cater to that. And that's not just about sustainability on property, but it's what are hotels doing in their communities and their destinations to really promote. Because as we move forward as an industry, that's going to become more relevant than ever. Because you can be a sustainable property, but if you're not supporting your own community and your own destination, you're not really feeding that funnel. So, I think loyal guests are going to become even more loyal. But they're looking for a new type of experience when they find they can get out and travel. I think that it's going to be more about a holistic well-being than it ever has been in the past.
Well, particularly millennials and Gen Zs far more cognizant of sustainability issues than possibly the boomers were. And they're almost demanding those things. So fabulous that you are launching a new brand to showcase some of the markets and the properties that live those values. Geraldine, a question for you. Do you see any other disruptors? Is the Airbnbs of the world continue to take some of the market share from the traditional hotel model, if I may use that?
Yeah, actually, one of the disruptors that I'm monitoring more closely is it's a brand called Selena. Many of you may have heard of it, and they have a global presence. They're in 60 countries right now, and they describe themselves as a lifestyle brand. So they're a bit of a hostel, a bit of a hotel, and a bit of a co-working space. And they have really evolved what you would naturally think of as a hostel. And their product is sharp. They're very thoughtful about where they develop their properties, or if they're going into a market, converting space. And they build partnerships with the local community, because that's at the core of the product, right? To make sure that it is authentic and representative of what you want to experience when you go to a Bogota, right? Or, even a local market here, like the vibrancy of a New York City and being in the middle of it, right? In a pre-COVID world, and we'll see how that evolves going forward. And so Selena is actually one of the brands that I'm monitoring more closely, because they are also launching or have launched a subscription-based model, where if I want to stay in several of their properties, I can pay a monthly fee. And there are some restrictions around how long you stay at one of their properties. But essentially, once you pay this flat fee, you could essentially pick and choose every month where you want to stay. And so again, with the flexible working from home arrangements and everything else that COVID has really brought to the forefront, I was a betting woman. I would bet on Selena.
Oh, wow. I have known about the brand, but quite candidly, I don't really understand their business model, because in hotel development, Capstack plays a huge role in getting the financing and who do you tie up with and the location and that sort of stuff. That's where the shared economy model came in, and particularly during pandemic, I understand that these residences did very well. I know, Lindsey, you have a component of your members in that operating model. Can you share how well those places performed during pandemic?
Yeah, the residential space performed really well. So we've got a collection of residences that are either part of our existing portfolio of hotel properties or standalone. During the pandemic, because people wanted space, they wanted to be with their families, but they wanted some of the services and amenities in a hotel. They outperformed. They did incredibly well, and I do think that that's a trend that's going to continue. I mean, that was already starting to happen, And I think there's going to continue to be growth just due to, it's everybody from boomers wanting to travel with their extended families to friends in general want to travel in groups. And now in light of what's happening, being able to control your own environment and not have to share public spaces with people you didn't know, that became, a tipping point for those properties. And I think it will continue to do well.
Soon after 9/11, I believe it was Disney that had launched a plan of togethering, where smaller groups they would put together to bring them to the parks and look after them as friends and families came together. I think this lodging component in form of residences has really accelerated that, because a lot of people do travel and go on vacations together to share some of the experiences. David, a couple of years ago, and this news might be old now, I believe it was 2018, when Graduate had gotten a sizable capital infusion, and your target was 100 locations by 2024. Are you still keeping to that target? Has that adjusted in some way, shape, or form? And will this pandemic help you accelerate even further?
Sometimes I feel like I need to ask that question of Ben Weppen, our founder and CEO, to see what the current number is that we're targeting in the next few years, because we like to shift it around sometimes. And I don't. 100, I think, is optimistic given how the world is impacted. I would probably say I think we will be at 50 hotels by 2024 pretty comfortably. We were supposed to be at, I think we had set a very round goal of 20 by 2020. We had beaten that by 30%. And so again, a lot has to say, are we going to continue to grow this holistically in terms of owner operator brands? I think we could be at 100 hotels if we were to franchise by 2024 pretty easily. But if we're going to continue to do it in our model as we currently are, it's certainly going to be a heavier lift based on kind of where the pandemic has put everything.
Fair enough. Sam, one more time, I've lost track of how long we've been on, but
don't worry about it. It's a good conversation.
Last-minute questions?
Well, I just want to check on, from all of you, Geraldine, Lindsey, and David, what your thoughts are. How would the guest experience change, in your view, as a result of this pandemic? Maybe, Geraldine, you have some thoughts. What are the changes you see in the guest experiences coming up?
I think we've touched upon it in some of our previous discussions, but the way I see the guest experience changing in a post-COVID world, again, is that leisure traveler and even corporate demand really wanting more private individual space, because they, that's subconscious fear of contracting the virus, I think will take some time to really fade away. And then what does that mean for what a hotel room provides, right? Again, larger spaces to allow for people to work comfortably, rest, possibly even work out, right? Which was something we saw even before 2020 with some hotels featuring workout equipment in the room. I believe that will grow in prominence, and people wanting to travel again with their family or significant others, even if it's a business trip. And again, the hotel room will need to comfortably accommodate all those needs going forward.
Thank you. And Lindsey, what are your thoughts on this, the changes in the guest experience?
I think it's just going to be a lot more choices. I think the reality is, as travelers start to travel again, there's a risk tolerance, right? Everybody's kind of got a comfort level. And I think, there's going to be sort of a lot of options between a remote check-in or kind of contactless check-in to still wanting to, deal with somebody at the front desk. I just think that, whether you're using QR codes or wanting menus, I just think that there's going to be a lot more choice and a lot more flexibility with that guest experience. It's been an interesting transition to how hotels have had to innovate to, operational efficiency, but still have that service level and warmth that gets hidden by a mask, So, I think that is Geraldine, and we've all talked about just sort of this customer journey is all about risk. I do think that there's going to be a lot longer stays. I agree. There'll be less trips, but longer trips. Definitely families are involved. I'm sitting here. My office mate is my dog. I think you're going to see taking pets in hotels. I really do. I think hotels that capture that and do it well, that's a whole new revenue source. But people are traveling with their extended family, which includes four-legged friends as well. So that's my outlook on it.
Good. And how about you, David? What's your thoughts?
I think Lindsey's absolutely right on choices. I think what's going to be interesting, and one of the positions we take is, part of our evolution as a brand and as a company and collection. I also, by the way, pick and choose when we're a brand or a collection of hotels, depending upon my audience. But one of the things we're doing is really, how are we using our data, our customer information? And what I mean by that is, and you're already seeing some of the bigger brands do this, but if you're in a loyalty program, what you get might change, right? So the way we're approaching it is because we don't. I just feel that they've created an experience to be totally transactional, and we're much more experiential based. So how are we identifying the customer that is spending X with us, and what are we doing for them? Is it just experiential? Maybe they do get housekeeping at no cost because we want to take extra care of them. But a normal guest that came through Expedia, sorry, you're not only getting the worst room, but you're probably getting the least amount of services. So it's becoming unbelievably sensitive to who our customer is, what they want. And I also believe not every customer wants the same thing. And so being able to provide that customer with what they want, because we're using our data more intelligently to be able to do that and provide the exact services to them. And to Lindsey's point too, we get asked the question about technology a lot, right? I mean, this was a decision we had to make very early on. It was, are we going to do remote check-in, or not just remote check-in, but keyless entry to our rooms? And we actually said no, because we believe the human component was unbelievably important, especially in a brand that is so high touch like ours, that has a certain amount of education and just the experiences. So we've said, we're doing technology, but it's on the back end. It's kind of the non-guest facing. It's how we're becoming more efficient as a company. It's how we're harnessing our data. And I think that's going to really be the change. And many customers may not even know exactly that's happening behind the scenes. They're just going to say, I'm being taken care of differently. And it's going to be fascinating to kind of see how we all evolve.
Yeah. In some of our early discussions, somebody came up, mentioned to us about prescribed hospitality, where you're in advance, you are basically the customer is giving exactly what they require, and then the hotel will provide that customized experience. And in many cases, the guest will never meet the staff at all during their stay. They just want full privacy, and that was, somebody coined the word prescribed hospitality for that. Okay, there was a question from one of our viewers. And maybe Geraldine, you can help out. Can you spell Selena? Somebody want to know, is it with a C or S or?
Selena. It's Selina.
Okay, so this was one of the viewers, so I'm sure he got that. So thank you. Abid, anything else? We have any further questions or comments?
Oh, well, look, you should never ask me if I have any questions, because I always do. But I think we have run way over our time. As my gratitude to Geraldine Guichardo with JLL Hospitality and Hotel Group, David Rochefort with the Graduate Hotels, and Lindsey Ueberroth with Preferred Hotels and Resorts. Fabulous conversation. Thank you so much for sharing all the things that you guys are doing for the industry and for your respective disciplines. Over to you, Sam.
Yes, I also like to, besides thanking the panel for the great discussion, I'd also like to thank all the live viewers who have joined us today, and also the replay viewers who are watching the show a little bit later on. So we're looking forward that if you like what you saw, we'll be asking you to give us a little bit of thumbs up that you had enjoyed the show. That means a lot to us. And we're looking forward to seeing you again in our next episode, which will be very shortly. So thank you very much. Geraldine, Lindsey, and David, thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Thank
Thumbs up.
Take care.